So I was just thinking today about the story of Alice in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. I'm going to have my copy of it here. Or if you really want to go out of your way, you purchase this copy, which is the annotated Alice. It gives all of the ideas and jokes and stories and problems in the margins. Really good copy. But this work here, written by Lewis Carroll in the 19th century, whose real name was Charles Dodson, and illustrated by Tenniel, is really a fantastic work to read. If you've never read it, you really ought. Even as an adult, you should read it. Basic story is that Alice goes down into Wonderland under the earth, and she has all these adventures until she finally confronts the Queen of Hearts and defeats her by standing up to her and comes back to this world. And then in the second installment, which was written later, Dodson wrote the first one in 1862. Then he wrote the second installment because the first was so popular. The second installment is Through the Looking Glass. And there she goes, Alice goes through this mirror, this looking glass, into this other world where again she meets various characters and eventually she becomes herself a queen at the end of the story. But abstracting from this story, I got to thinking about how it is that as human beings, we repeat stories over time. Because that's what we do. Literature and art, music, they all repeat earlier images, earlier forms. And the term for that in literature is mythopoeic speculation. Big word, right? Greek. It basically means that through the creation, the poiesis of myth, of mythology, we speculate or think about what it means to be human. This was brought up in a book called Slaying the Dragon by Bernard Bateau. And Bateau's analysis of the Exodus story is quite fantastic. I highly recommend it to adults. It's a very fine analysis, I think. His whole point is that stories repeat over time, and artists take these stories that they've heard or read, and they reconstitute them to say something new. Now, what this implies is that there's no new story under the sun. We've told stories the same over and over and over again in different forms, adding things, subtracting things, making the story focus on a certain age level or a certain interest level or a certain cultural level. And by doing so, we keep thinking about, in the great conversation of humanity, we keep thinking about what it means to be human. What are we as human beings? And what are we doing on this planet? So my classic example is if you've seen that animated movie by Pixar, Bug's Life. That story tells about some peasant ants who are threatened by banditos, grasshoppers, who come and take their food or threaten to take their food. And so what those ants do is they go and they get big hero bugs to fight for them. And those big hero bugs come and they save the little village. There are 7 all total, although in Bug's Life it's 8 because the 2 pill bugs count as 1. They pop open. You pop open nicely, don't ya? So that story is a retelling of an earlier movie called The Magnificent Seven, where Mexican peasants are threatened by banditos who are going to take their food. They go and get hired guns, cowboys, who come and basically protect the town, help the town to defend itself. And that's a retelling of an earlier movie by Akira Kurosawa called The Magnificent Seven. I highly recommend watching all 3. Very fine cinema. But they're repeats of the same story. That's mythopoeic speculation. Same thing's happening in Alice. And you got to wonder, well, what story is it retelling? What is it that Charles Dodson, Lewis Carroll, who was steeped in classics, by the way, is retelling? The way to find that out is to ask certain questions. Is there a story in classical mythology of a young girl going into the underworld where she faces certain trials and then eventually emerges again as the queen, if you will? The answer is yes. What I would ask you to do is to look up the story of Persephone in the underworld. The story of Kore, Persephone, daughter of Ceres, in the underworld. What you'll find, startling enough, is that they're the same story. Not only are they the same story, but they're telling a story which is a pattern we see elsewhere. This is the story that Joseph Campbell put down as the monomyth, the one big myth we tell over and over again. He called it the hero's journey. And in the hero's journey, that young soul goes from the familiar world into the unfamiliar underworld, where they face various trials, including their own doppelganger. And facing those trials makes them stronger till they can face their nemesis, their enemy, and they come back full circle to where they began, the familiar world. That story is told over and over again, and you can see it in a number of different myths, even in our modern world. So when we read Alice in Wonderland, we're seeing that same pattern, that same story. And when we read the story of Persephone in the underworld, we're reading that same story. The question I leave you with then is, what does it all mean? What does it represent? What are these stories trying to tell us? That's a thought for another day. Until then, be seeing.